Good evening and welcome to MetroFocus. I'm Rafael P. Roman. Tim Robbins, perhaps best known as the star of the cult classic The Shawshank Redemption and as the Academy Award-nominated director of Dead Man Walking, has been exploring the themes of redemption, compassion, and freedom within the American prison system through much of his career. Robbins' new film, 45 Seconds of Laughter, a documentary shot in a maximum security California state prison, continues to explore those themes in a truly powerful and emotionally impactful way. The documentary follows a group of incarcerated men, many of whom have been convicted of serious crimes, as they take part in drama workshops led by Robbins' own theater company, the Actors Gang. In the workshops, the participants learn to tap into suppressed emotions, to explore their own humanity, and to express joy within the confines of their incarceration. Here's a look.
I want you guys to give me a picture of a funeral. In 3, don't think, just go. 2, 1, a red.
Just really receive from each other and see if you can find in the state a tone, like a sound, together. A tone that is extended. Hear that? Share with us, someone else. Keep the tone going.
And joining me now is the co-founder of the Actors Gang Prison Project and the director of 45 Seconds of Laughter, Tim Robbins. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
So Tim, it's an unbelievable film.
Thank you.
We were talking about it before the cameras started rolling, but let's get right to it. What is the origin, first of all, of the Prison Project? When and how did it begin?
So one of my actresses, Sabra Williams, came to me about 13 years ago and said, I would like to start a pilot program in a prison using the work that we do, the way that we work and train our own actors. And after a couple of those sessions, we came to start to refine it enough to understand that it could be truly effective for the men and women that we were working with. And so it was after about 2 or 3 years that we started understanding the power of it and seeing that there was something, for whatever reason, there was something about the physical nature of the work that we do and the way we train actors and the demand for emotional honesty. A combination of those two seemed to really click with the gentleman we were working with. And so after a while, we came to understand through one particular individual, a man named Chris Bisbano, who's in the film. He started his own theater company after we had taught him. And he
was an inmate.
Yes. Yeah. And so he trained, we got a call from the prison one day, said, one of your guys trained 40 new guys and they want to put on a play for you. Would you come back and watch it? And I said, yeah, sure. And we came back and tears in our eyes, and we saw that's the future. That's paying it forward. That's how we do it. That's how we expand. We empower the incarcerated men and women themselves to run their own workshops after we train them. So that's how we're able to be now in 13 prisons on 15 yards.
So how are the prisoners selected? How do they come to these workshops?
We don't want the trustees or the well-behaved. That's not going to do any good for any of us. We want the people that are they're having a struggle. We want the shot callers, the people that are heads of gangs. We want rival gangs in the same room. We want it to be multi-ethnic. We want it to be mixed so that the work can have its best effect.
But you have ground rules within the workshop. What are some of those ground rules?
Well, first we do our own training, ground rules about how we behave. It's very, very important to treat it as a class and not as a social gathering. And the rules are the same rules that we have for our own actors when we train them.
But I mean, I'm thinking of, where you talk in the film about you don't use the gang names. You use their own actual names. You don't do language gang signs, that kind of thing.
Right. The very first thing we do is we introduce ourselves, and you have to use your real name, your birth name, not your prison name. This is one of the things that sets everybody on the road to rediscovery, because in prison, people have to adopt personalities that they might not be comfortable with, but it's just they have to survive. I've talked to many people that are, particularly white people in prison that have to join a Aryan nation kind of organization in order to survive, and they have that's not their inclination, that's not who they were outside, but they have to when they're in. And the same, across the board, there's so many different pressures. It's one of the things we talk about in the classes, and one of the things the guys tell us after, and the women tell us after a while, after they put on the makeup and been doing the class for a while, they say, I didn't realize I've been wearing a mask the entire time I've been in prison. That mask I'm wearing out on the art is not who I am. I'm more than that. I'm more than that angry face, that tough guy face.
And they say things like that on the air.
Yeah.
They say, only part of myself can go through with this mask on.
Right.
It's amazing. You have them throughout these workshops. You have them do a series of exercises. Each exercise has its own goal or purpose. But overall, what is the large goal or purpose of this series of exercises? Where do you want to get them to emotionally and psychologically?
I think the ultimate goal is to remind all of them that they're human beings and that they're worth something. And the way they achieve that is through a collective, not through the individual. And that's why we organize most of the exercises around group activities. How do you achieve this together? The two lines walking. How do you reach the end, turn around at the same time without seeing each other?
How does that happen, by the way?
It blows me away every time, but it happens. I saw one in Ironwood prison that was about a minute and a half, where they had their backs to each other, and then somehow miraculously they turn around
at the same time.
It was stunning. I get chills even thinking about it right now.
Yeah.
It's about connection. It's about communicating in ways that we're not normally used to communicating in. It's about what can happen in an ensemble when you accept each other, you don't judge each other, and you are generous with each other.
Now, talk about La Commedia dell'arte. That's the theater form that you use in these workshops. Why that?
Well, back in 1984, I trained with an actor named Georges Bigot from the Théâtre du Soleil, which is Ariane Mnouchkin's group in Paris. And they had come to LA for the Olympic Arts Festival, and they were a sensation. And so one of their actors, George, stayed behind and ran this workshop in the Commedia dell'arte. So four of us from the Actors Gang, which was at the time 2 years old, a bunch of punk rockers with a big passion but not a lot of discipline, we took this class, and it kind of shifted our thought about what we can do in theater and how we can achieve it. And essentially, the Commedia dell'arte is the universal story. It's a people's story. Those troops were traveling around Italy when it began, doing social satire in the public square. They weren't in theaters, they weren't accepted, they weren't part of the elite, and they were, in a lot of ways, the enemy of power. And most of the stories told in the Commedia dell'arte have to do with the struggle between the poor and the rich and the pursuit of true love. And so it's a story we know, it's a universal story. I've seen this story in many different cultures that are not Italian. You know, I saw it in Bali in a town square, the same story. I'm a young woman in love with a man, wants to marry him, father wants to sell it off to, you know. It's and so we start with that, and having our typical characters helps just eliminate the whole pressure of creating a character out of whole cloth. You have an archetype, but within the archetype there are individual specific behaviors that you can find.
And you see the inmates, you know, dig from their own experiences as they perform.
And every one of them has been in love. So and
they do it in Spanish. This one guy, I mean, is so eloquent. Anyway, you know, there are a number of many moving moments in the film. There's one where you have one inmate portray sadness, and he breaks down and actually breaks down and cry. in front of the camera. There's another in the end where the inmates invite the guards into their circle. Thank the guards and the guards thank them. I almost start crying when I think about these things. Is there a particular moment, not just in the film, but in all the workshops that stays with you?
There's a moment that always gets me, which is you take all of them to a funeral. And you saw a little glimpse of it in this film. But the longer exercise is you take them all to the funeral of one of the Commedia dell'arte characters. And each one of them has to go to the grave and say something. Doesn't have to be out loud. It can be under their breath. A goodbye. And they put a flower into the grave, a mimed flower. And each one goes through this, and you see them going deeper and deeper into this state of sadness or fear or anger. And they're remembering funerals they've been to. Or worse, they are remembering funerals they couldn't attend of their mothers or their sisters because they were incarcerated. And then at the end of, after everyone's put the flower in, I ask everyone to look at each other. And it's that moment that things shift in a huge way, because they look at their former enemy and they see humanity in their eyes. And they can't hate them in the abstract anymore. They've shared this. And then after that, I say, if you want to, you can comfort the other person. And then you see these guys hugging and tears coming out of their eyes. And it's like, it's, you know, that's the shift. That's what they start taking out into the yard. And since we're working with the shot callers, and since we're working with the people that have power within prison, it starts to make the yard safer.
Well, listen, at the end of the film, you end the film with a quote from Sister Helen Prejean, who of course wrote Dead Man Walking, was the film that you were nominated for directing. The quote reads, "Everyone is worth more than their worst act." Is that, in a nutshell, what you hope the viewers take from this film? The knowledge that and the sense that that is true?
I would hope so. And it's something I think we all know. It's just we need to be reminded of it. I think the other thing is that when we have seen the incarcerated portrayed in media, whether it's in films or television shows, or whether it's in those shock documentaries they do about how dangerous and you know, how bad everyone is in prison, it doesn't really promote a particularly compassionate or understanding view of who we are incarcerating. And as long as that is the case, it's okay for us as a society to put someone away for 40 years for possession of marijuana. Until we realize who these people are, until we understand that there's an amazing wealth of human talent and worth in prison. We have to, you know, until we understand them as human beings, we're going to continue this incredibly insane over-incarceration we've adopted as policy in this country. And when you look at the specifics of it, it's an outrage that we're putting kids away for so long. Like when I was doing Shawshank Redemption, I asked the prison guards, and this is 1993 in Mansfield, Ohio, pretty conservative area. And I asked the prison guards what they would do to change the system if they could. And they all said, legalize marijuana. And this is, you know, salt of the earth, conservative Republican Ohio saying this. And I said, well, what do you mean? They said, well, listen, if you don't have the courage to legalize marijuana, at least have two separate places to put people. The nonviolent and the violent. Because what we're doing is we're putting in these kids that got unlucky, that got busted for possession, and we're putting them in with violent criminals. And they called it crime school. They called prison crime school. So obviously we weren't listening to our prison guards back in '93. We got into this system of over-incarceration that has just blown up. We incarcerate more people than anybody in the world. And when you understand the degree of sentencing for the crime, oftentimes nonviolent crimes because of lack of discretion of a judge legally, or minimum sentences, or 3-strike laws, you start to understand we're doing something awful to not only the people that we're incarcerating, but their families. Their families are destroyed by this.
Now, you mentioned Shawshank Redemption. This is the 25th anniversary of that film. It's unbelievable. You are known, as I said in the introduction, you're probably best known for that and for directing Sister Perjan's book, the film version of Dead Man Walking. This theme of justice within the prison system clearly has been a big part of your social concerns. Why?
Well, I grew up in Greenwich Village in the 60s and early 70s, and as romantic as that sounds, it was it was a rough time. There were fights, there were stabbings, you had to learn to run or fight, and you had to avoid certain areas. You know, the paths that I would take to my apartment were often determined by trying to avoid a potentially violent situation. So to grow up in that environment, and I came to understand that, you know, the people that were going to prison were oftentimes people that I knew, and so I never really felt that far removed from people that weren't as lucky as I was. In fact, I still play hockey with one of the guys that went through that, and so I in the 80s and 90s, when I saw people start to get, when we criminalized possession of marijuana, for example, in the 70s, and when that started to really take hold and the over-incarceration started to happen, it was there, but for the grace of God go I. I was guilty of the crime of possession that people were being put away for many, many years for. So again, I didn't feel that far removed from the people that we were incarcerating. And so when Sabra came to me with the idea, I said, absolutely, because the Actors Gang as an organization has always tried to reach out to our community. And we had been doing education programs for years in underserved schools. So we saw this as a natural extension of that.
All right. Well, Tim, the film 45 Seconds of Laughter, by the way, because that's the last thing they do at every exercise, they laugh for 45 seconds.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful film. I can't say enough about it. Thank you so much for making it.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
45 Seconds of Laughter will be featured at the New York Film Festival, currently underway at Lincoln Center. For more information, head on over to metrofocus.org.